Hello guys, LC Holt here, and this is my update for the week of January the 7th. This is the third part in the Zodiac series, and as you can see, I have a very special guest host sitting to my immediate right. This is actress, musician, my very good friend, one of my oldest friends, probably my oldest friend, Rebecca Ivey.
Hello.
So what we're going to do today with the Zodiac is going to be a little bit different than our previous shows. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present the story of the suspect Arthur Leigh Allen. And since Rebecca is not very well versed in the Zodiac case, she's going to give her kind of outside opinion of what she thinks of these facts, and in the end, kind of give us an idea if she thinks this guy could possibly have been the Zodiac killer. Now, before we get into that, I want to do a couple corrections from the previous show because, you know, this is a live show. And when you're talking live, sometimes you get your names and your dates mixed up. And whenever I do shows like the Zodiac, I want to try and make sure the information is as correct as possible. So on the last show, I said that the last victim was in September of '69. That's not right. It was in October of '69. And that was Paul Stine. I also said that Paul Stine worked for the San Francisco Chronicle when I met Paul Lavery. So I got my Pauls mixed up back. I know, but you know, stuff happens. So anytime I catch things like that, I will always correct them on the next show. Now, that being said, we are going to jump into Arthur Leigh Allen. And before we do that, I'm going to show you guys, so you know who we're talking about, a picture of Arthur Leigh Allen.
It's like,
what's that?
Mr. Rogers with murderers.
That's right. All right, you ready to see this picture? Here we go. So what do you think? There's Arthur.
Guilty.
All right, so Mr. Allen there. He's standing next to two women who do not want to be known to be standing next to Mr. Allen.
But hey, a plus size. It is ready for like a face and whole app type thing. I'm
That's
dating
right.
myself.
Like I could be the sweet girl there on the right, and you could be the lady on to the left, or you could take the bouffant if you wanted to.
Okay.
All right, so that's the guy we're going to be talking about. That's Arthur Leigh Allen. Arthur Leigh Allen was born December 18th, 1933 in Honolulu, Hawaii, but he was actually raised in Vallejo, California, which is where quite a few of these murders took place. Okay, he went to Vallejo High School. He graduated. He went to Vallejo College, majored in liberal arts, got an associate's degree there. But what he really wanted to do was he wanted to be a teacher. Before
that does it right there.
You think that's
you know what teachers put up with.
Well, I mean, as much as they get paid, you know. But here we're going to get before we go into when he started teaching elementary school, because he taught small children, and that I'm gonna. But just wait though, wait, because I'm gonna tell you something about what he did. Okay, that the face is appropriate. Okay, so before I do that, though, I want to talk about an incident that happened June 15th, 1958, because Allen was still relatively young. There was a guy who lived in Vallejo named Ralph Spinelli, and he went on to be kind of a small-time crook, and he ran nightclubs in Vallejo and a bunch of other places. I think he had a partial ownership in a nightclub in Anchorage, Alaska. But that will come later, and more about Ralph Spinelli will come later. But I want to talk about this incident that happened in 1958. Ralph Spinelli went to a party, and there was a young woman there who was already, what would you say? I guess she had a boyfriend, so she was taken, right? Well, Ralph helped himself to a dance with her, and the boyfriend didn't like it. And the boyfriend was a friend of Arthur Leigh Allen's. So when Ralph Spinelli went home and went to his little in-law apartment there next to his parents' house, he was sleeping in bed, and there was a pounding on the door. And this fella, the boyfriend, came into his apartment, and they got into a bit of an altercation about this girl. And punches were thrown. And the boyfriend fell to his knees and proceeded to grab Ralph Spinelli's skin puppy. I guess, in a desperate move to, do whatever. And so Ralph Spinelli managed to wrest his skin puppy away from this fellow.
I love how you put it so delicately.
Yeah, I'm very technical when I'm talking about the assault of skin puppies. But as soon as that happened, the door exploded, and a man carrying a knife came into the apartment. It was the friend of the boyfriend. It was Arthur Leigh Allen. And Ralph Spinelli called the police. Actually, I think his father did. And they came and they arrested Arthur Leigh Allen for not obstructing justice, disturbing the peace. But there were no charges pressed, and that's important when we get later on into the story, okay, with Ralph Spinelli. But we're going to go off of Ralph Spinelli for just a second, and we're going to talk about when Arthur Leigh Allen became a school teacher. In 1962, he started teaching at Travis Elementary School. And he got fired. He only taught there for about a year. And the reason he got fired is because, like it is nowadays, you can't bring a loaded gun to school even if you're a teacher. When he brought a loaded handgun.
Although you're trying to change that.
They are trying to change that. Yeah. But at that time, he had it in his car in the parking lot, right? And they found out he had this loaded handgun. They fired his ass. But that didn't prevent him from getting a different job at a different elementary school called Valley Springs. That was in like 1966. He worked there for a couple years. Do you know what Arthur Leigh Allen's reason for being fired from Valley Springs is? Can you guess?
Another handgun.
No, worse. He molested a student. So that ended his career as a teacher. Okay. So that's, already we're getting the idea that this guy is not really,
He doesn't make great life choices.
He does not make great life choices. Okay. So he had to move in with his parents in Vallejo over on 32 Fresno Street. That address is going to be important. I'll explain that shortly. His mother one year gave him a wristwatch. And he showed this wristwatch to a friend of his named Don Cheney. Now, would you like me to show you the wristwatch? Because this wristwatch might actually be important to you understanding this case.
Are you asking me? I don't really think you're giving me a choice.
It's not, well, it is sort of a rhetorical question. Yes. Would you like to see it?
Sure.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, automatic, yeah.
That wristwatch was a watch that Arthur Leigh Allen wore for the rest of his life. And as you can see, it says Zodiac. That was the brand, Zodiac. And do you see that little symbol above the word Zodiac?
Yes.
That is the symbol that the Zodiac used on his letters to the police later. Now, this watch is the only time that that name and that symbol ever appeared together prior to the Zodiac's letters. So, what do you think about that detail?
That's interesting. But how many of those watches did they make?
They actually, it wasn't like a brand like Timex.
Yeah.
So it was, but it wasn't, they made quite a few of them. I think the point of interest there that a lot of the armchair detectives, like to state is that he owned that watch, and he's the only suspect that we know that owned a Zodiac wristwatch that we know of. But there have been a lot of suspects. Like last week, we did 4 suspects on one show. Okay. And there are many more than, the 5 we're talking about, including this show. But he showed that to his friend Don Cheney. Mm-hmm. And that was, later in 1968. What's really important about Don Cheney is on New Year's Day of 1969, Don Cheney insists that there was a conversation he had with Arthur Leigh Allen in which Arthur Leigh Allen was talking about a book he wanted to write. And he said the book is going to be about a serial killer. And he said a few very interesting things. He supposedly told Don Cheney that the killings would be at random, that the killer in the book would taunt the police with letters, that they would use that crosshair symbol as their symbol, the circle with the cross inside of it, that they would call themselves the Zodiac, that the killer would wear makeup and change their hair when they did the crimes, that the killer would attach a flashlight to his gun so that he could shoot people in the dark. And he said that something the killer would do in the book would be find a woman driving at night, flash his lights, pull her over to the side of the road, say her tire was messed up, and then loosen the lug nuts. And then when she tried to drive away, the tire would come off and he would kidnap her. Now, these are very specific points. The tire thing actually happened to a woman named Kathleen Johns, who later identified the Zodiac composite sketch as being the man who did it to her. But she got away. She had a small child in a car with her. She got away, thankfully. Some people say that never happened. Some people said that was a cry for attention and that she never actually got kidnapped or anything. That's up for debate. I don't want to say one way or another if her story is true or not, because I wasn't there. Now, the gun with the flashlight, we know the Zodiac used that at Blue Rock Springs, and he may have used that in the first murder, which was on Lake Herman Road. And I'll go into the details of those crimes here in a minute. But now, if Don Cheney is correct, is not lying, then Arthur Leigh Allen, based on that conversation, would have to be the Zodiac killer. And you want to know why? Because none of those crimes had happened yet in January of 1969. Mm-hmm. Okay, there was one shooting in Lake Herman Road that we know was the Zodiac. That happened in December of 68. So that crime had already taken place. Supposedly, Arthur Leigh Allen took Don Cheney out to the site of that crime and started describing what you could do to a couple if you caught them there at night. And Don Cheney said that as he was talking, he was going in and out of past and present tense, suggesting that this might have been something that had already happened. Hmm. And if that's correct, if Arthur Leigh Allen was the killer and this conversation took place on New Year's Day of 1969, then that would have already happened. But none of the other cases had happened yet. Which means if Don Cheney is telling the truth, Arthur Leigh Allen would have to be the Zodiac. Okay. Because he's giving, but the thing about that is this. If you were a master criminal and you were going to pull off a huge string of unsolved murders, would you take your best friend to the site of a murder and then explain your master plan to him before you did it?
That's weird. It was the best friend who did it.
Well, there's at least one cop who actually thinks Don Cheney might have had more to do with it than he said, because Don Cheney later on used to say stuff like, well, Lee wanted me to give him my thumbprint, so I put my thumb down into a paraffin ball and he had my thumbprint.
Who does that?
Right.
Like, sure.
He also said, oh, you know what? Lee had me licking stamps and envelopes for him at one point. So it sounds almost like Don Cheney is hedging his bets. So if they do DNA on those envelopes and they turn out to be his DNA, mm-hmm. he can just say, well, he did have me licking stamps for him.
Yeah.
Strange thing is they did that DNA. They tested it against Arthur Leigh Allen and Don Cheney, and it didn't match either one of them. Hmm. So it's just a strange thing for Don Cheney to say. That I'm not entirely sure that Cheney, I don't know. There are things about him that kind of make me raise an eyebrow, because he seems to add more and more details as more and more books are written. It's almost like he's reading these books of what happened with the Zodiac case and saying, oh, well, Arthur told me that. Oh, and then Lee told me that. And, so I don't know. Like I said, if you believe Don Cheney, then Arthur Leigh Allen would have to have been the Zodiac killer because he told him everything before it ever happened.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure if I believe Don Cheney.
Yeah.
So now we're kind of going to go into the cases specifically and talk about, Arthur Leigh Allen's connection one way or another to the cases. Okay. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is actually a case that we discussed last week, and it was the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California. It happened in 1966. So about 2 years prior to the first official Zodiac killing. And the reason I say the first official Zodiac killing is because a lot of people don't know if Sherry Jo Bates was killed by the Zodiac. This is another one of those armchair detective things where some people think yes and some people think no. I'll give you kind of a brief overview. She went to a school library there in Riverside, a city college. And one night after about 9:30, after coming out of studying, she found her car disabled. And she apparently left with somebody who then attacked and murdered her about 100 yards away and left her body in an alley. And this person wrote a confession letter to the local police and to the newspapers, which is what Zodiac did often later. And it was written on a royal typewriter with elite font. Now, that's going to be important later on. But again, we don't know if Sherry Jo Bates was actually a Zodiac victim. That is still up for debate. Some of the cops say yes, some of the cops say no, some of them say, maybe. Who knows? But we know that Allen was in that area at that time. Records show that he was working at the school at the time, because remember, this is 1966.
Okay.
So the records of the school show that he was not at work on November 1st. And the Sherry Jo Bates murder happened on October 30th. Okay. Now, that's really about the only thing that would tie Allen to the Sherry Jo Bates case. It's just the fact that he said he was in the area when it happened, and he took a day off work, like right after, a couple days after. So, there's not a lot to tie those two together. And again, Sherry Jo Bates might not have even been killed by the Zodiac. So I just wanted to point out that sort of vague connection. Now we're going to move on to the first official Zodiac killing. And that was December 20th, 1968, Lake Herman Road in Vallejo, which is where Arthur Leigh Allen lived. In fact, he lived 7 minutes from the turnoff where David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen parked on December 20th. And he was taking her out on her first date. And they pulled off. It's like a rural road there, and there's a little turn-off area where you can pull off and have a little lover's lane, right? Okay. At some point that night, a man came, pulled up behind them. We don't know exactly what happened because, unfortunately, both of the victims died. But we know that David Faraday was shot in the back of the ear, right here in the head, and that the girl tried to run and she got shot about 5 times. In the dark. So remember what I said about Arthur Leigh Allen saying he was going to put a flashlight on the gun. And he told that to Don Cheney. Okay, that's really the only thing that ties Arthur Leigh Allen to the Lake Herman case is the fact that he lived 7 minutes away.
Okay. He
didn't know those people. As far as we know, they were teenagers, very young. He was older. He was living with this. Remember, this was in 1968, so he'd already been fired for molesting the kid. And so he was living with his parents on Fresno Street over in Vallejo, very close. Okay. Now, there may be more connections with the second official Zodiac case, which was also in Vallejo. This time, he only lived about 4 minutes away from Blue Rock Springs. And this killing happened on July 4th of 1969. Okay, so this would have been post Don Cheney conversation.
Okay.
By about 6 or 7 months. And this was Darlene Ferrin and Mike Michaud. Now, on the previous shows, we've talked about Darlene Ferrin. She was a very attractive young lady, and she had many male suitors, though she was married. And one of these suitors was Mike Michaud, the young man who was in the car. And you do not approve of this, do you? Well, let me tell you something else. One of those suitors was apparently a guy named, can you guess? Lee.
Oh.
Okay. Now, where Lee lived on Fresno Street was right down the block from the International House of Pancakes, also known as IHOP. He used to walk over to IHOP, and that's where Darlene Ferrin worked. She worked at IHOP. She was slinging those pancakes, baby.
The smiley pancake.
That's right. And Don Cheney, once again, Mr. Cheney, said that Lee liked a girl who was a waitress at the International House of Pancakes. Okay, so, oh man, need some water. Jeez, those are I was thinking of pancakes, man. You got to me.
Good thing they're open late.
You want to get some pancakes when this is done? I'm just kidding. So anyway, July 4th, Mike Michaud and Darlene Ferrin are driving. They go and they park at Blue Rock Springs, and there's no one around, though folks are setting off fireworks and stuff, but they're the only two in the parking lot.
Okay.
A car pulls up behind them. Now, it's been said several times that that car was a brown Corvair. But Mike Michaud, because of his injuries, has certain impairments. He has said he doesn't know if it's a compact car or a Cadillac. He's also said it was definitely a brown Corvair. So, you know, his memory is not 100% reliable. But you have to keep in mind, what happened was somebody got out of this mysterious car and walked over to where Darlene and Mike Michaud were parking and just shot them full of holes. And he had a flashlight in their eyes, and it may have been attached to the gun he was firing, which was I mean, he just shot. I mean, I tell you, he shot him like crazy. And Mike managed to get into the backseat of the car, and the guy came back, reloaded, came back and shot him some more. So, and then he left, he drove away. Now, if it was a Corvair, Arthur Leigh Allen's friend was trying to sell a brown Corvair. And at that point, Arthur was between jobs because of the molestation charge, but he managed to get a job at a gas station as an attendant. And people saw that his friend's Corvair parked at the gas station. So he would borrow it. You know. Now, again, Mike Michaud can't say for sure if it's a compact car or a Cadillac. So we're not even sure that this was if it was a brown Corvair for absolute certain, that would be pretty damning. Yeah. Wouldn't you say?
Yes.
But we're not sure because Mike managed to survive. Darlene was alive when the cops got there, but she was on her way out. She told Mike earlier that the man who was following them was somebody who was obsessed with her. And when the car pulled up behind them while they were parking, she said, "Oh God, he's come back." And then someone came over and shot him. So Darlene seems to have known who her killer was.
Okay.
But unfortunately, she wasn't able to communicate that because by the time the cops got there, Mike was in horrible shape, but she was even worse. He pulled through. Unfortunately, she did not. So it seems like Darlene was the intended victim.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Zodiac is he always spent more time trying to kill the woman than he did the man, which is why 2 men survived out of the couples that were attacked. And none of the women did. Okay, so that was Blue Rock Springs. That was on July 4th of 1969. Now we're going to move to the next case, Lake Berryessa. Now this was unusual because it was in broad daylight. There was a couple down by the lake, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. And they were just kind of chilling and having a picnic. About 6 o'clock at night, but it was in September of 1969, so it was still daylight out. And I discussed this on our first show, but since you weren't here, I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So she's sitting there, he's looking out over the lake, she's laying with her arms on his chest, and she's facing him. So he's facing the lake and she's facing him. Mm-hmm. So she sees the park behind him. This is a very isolated spot. People come out here to, picnic and stuff. July 4th, and stuff, July 4th is over with, so they're the only ones out there right now, except for some fishermen kind of on the lake. So they got the place to themselves. Well, she's sitting there, and she becomes distracted, and eventually she tells him there's a guy over there. And he goes, well, okay, there's a guy over there. It's a public park. And then she says, well, he went behind a tree. And he goes, well, that's weird, but he's probably, taking a piss, right? And then she says, oh my God, he's got a gun. And so Brian turns around and gets to his feet. When she said he went behind a tree, he thought that she meant a tree like 100 yards away. Oh. He went behind a tree like 15 feet away.
Okay.
And so Brian turns around, there's a guy standing there with a gun, and he's wearing an executioner's hood over his head.
Well, why didn't she point that out?
Well,
when he went behind, did he have it on?
No, he didn't. Okay. He didn't have it. So he went behind a tree to put on his scary hood, see? Okay. And it had a bib on it, and on that bib is drawn a circle with a cross through it. The Zodiac symbol.
Okay.
Okay, so he walks up to them, and make a long story short, he says, I need to take your car, and I'm going to take your money. I killed a guard trying to get out of jail, and I'm just trying to get to Mexico. And Brian's like, I got 75 cents, dude, but you can have the car. And so he tosses him the car keys, and then Zodiac's like, well, got to get you tied up now. And so he has Cecilia tie up Brian, and then he ties up Cecilia, and then he notices that she tied Brian loosely. So he reties Brian, and they're hog-tied on their stomachs. Mm-hmm. And then Brian says, was that gun even loaded? And Zodiac takes the clip out of the gun and shows him a loaded clip. And he puts the clip back. He puts the gun in his holster, and he pulls out a foot-long bayonet-style knife. And he starts to stab him. And he stabs him all the way to the hilt with this foot-long knife. Brian pretends to be dead. Cecilia is freaking out, and he's stabbing her even more than he stabbed Brian. And then after a moment, he stands up, and Brian says that it seemed as if he was looking at them, making sure they were dead, and then he walks off. But neither of them were dead. And they were stuck out there, hog-tied, bleeding, stabbed multiple times, screaming for the fishermen in the lake to come over and help them, and no one does. And it starts to get dark. Eventually, a fisherman comes by on a boat with his son and hears them and turns off the boat motor. And Brian was like, oh, thank God, somebody's going to come help us. Well, the guy didn't. He just kept going. But he did go to the ranger station. Brian didn't know that, though. He just thought the guy was like, well, fuck that. And he just kept going, right? So Brian managed to get his hands loose. Actually, she managed to get loose somehow, and then she loosened his restraint. She wasn't in any shape to move, but he managed to get up, and he would walk about 5 feet holding his chest, and he would fall down, and he would say things would start to get dark, and he'd rest for a minute, and he'd get up, and he'd walk 5 more feet, and he managed to make it 500 yards to a road where he saw a truck pulling up, and he thought, oh God, he's come back for me. Well, luckily it was the park ranger that the fisherman went to get, and Brian survived. Cecilia, unfortunately, did not. Now, with that story told, now I'm going to tell you how Arthur Leigh Allen may or may not connect to that case. On September 27th, 1969, Arthur Leigh Allen said he was going to go to Lake Berryessa to skin dive, because that was something he liked to do. He liked to scuba dive. Okay. Now, there was a detective who later asked Arthur about this, a guy named Sergeant Lynch. He said that he decided not to go to Lake Berryessa. That was his intention, but instead he went to a place called Salt Point Ranch on the coast. And he said that he met a couple there, and that they had some chickens, and that he used his knife to cut up the chickens. And the reason his neighbor saw him with a foot-long knife that had blood on it that day is because he cut up some chickens for these people on the coast, and they cooked up some chicken. So apparently,
what did you do on December 27th?
on September, yeah,
September
27th.
September.
Yeah.
Say what?
Yeah. And so, you know, have you ever gone to the beach and just met a couple and they were like, I got some live chickens. You got a knife we could cut these suckers up with? I want to fry these things. I got some barbecue sauce and shit. What do you think of that alibi?
Well, maybe they were starting a drive-through chicken business. I don't know.
I don't know. You know, that was the alibi. And Arthur said that
really dumb alibi.
It's almost as bad as what was his name? The actor that killed his wife. No, that didn't kill his wife. The one that said he went back in the restaurant to get his gun and she got shot. You know, Robert Blake. Robert Blake. He was like, I went back in the restaurant to get my gun because I left it there, you know, like people do. And when I came out again, my wife was shot. Anyway, we're not going to get off onto Robert Blake because he's still alive and he's crazy as hell, and I don't want him showing up at my door. But going back to Arthur Leigh Allen,
he is the Zodiac.
Who, Robert Blake? Oh, that's interesting. I think Beck has hit on to something there.
It was a joke. I'm sorry, Robert Blake.
He could have been.
I love your films.
He is crazy as fuck. He was our gang. He was one of the rascals.
Yes.
But anyway, back to this. Arthur Leigh Allen said he had a neighbor who could support this alibi. The neighbor was dead. Mm-hmm. So there's no way to support this alibi. Now, Brian Hartnell.
Did he offer them any chicken?
I don't know.
He had no leftovers to show for it.
No, he didn't bring any.
All of these chickens and not a chicken finger in sight.
Not a feather, not a bone, just a foot-long knife with blood on it.
Not 3 strips and a biscuit.
Right.
Okay.
It's very odd, you know, to say, oh, I'm going to go to the lake where these people happen to be killed. And I did bring a foot-long knife with me. But, you know, I decided not to go. I went to the beach and there was blood on the knife, but it was from a chicken that this couple had. You know, it's all very not the greatest alibi. Now, Brian Hartnell, who survived Lake Berryessa, they took him in to where Arthur Leigh Allen was working at an oil refinery and showed him through a mirror or through a window is Arthur Leigh Allen and said, is that the guy? And he's like, well, the physical description is very close. Like, that's about the size of the guy.
Did they put a hood on?
Yeah. Now, could you please put on this executioner's hood and hold this 45? Now, the thing about it is, Brian Hartnell later heard Arthur Leigh Allen's voice and said that did not sound like the man that he spoke to, the man who attacked him.
Now, don't you feel bad? The man made chicken.
Right. Poor guy. But Arthur Leigh Allen at Lake Berryessa, they found boot prints of the killer walking back to his car. It was 10.5 size boot. Do you know what size boot Arthur Leigh Allen wore?
10.5.
How did you guess?
You're leading me.
All right, now I'm going to jump back over to Ralph Spinelli. Remember Ralph Spinelli?
Oh, yes.
The guy that owned the nightclubs?
Yes.
The skin puppy guy. Well, years later, this was in 1969. He was running this is about 11 years after the skin puppy incident. He's running a series of nightclubs. Mm-hmm. And he says that one night, Arthur Leigh Allen came to one of his nightclubs while he was working there and said he wanted to talk to him. And so Ralph came out of the office, went over, and Arthur Leigh Allen said, hey, you remember me? And Ralph was like, no, I don't. Who are you? And Arthur Leigh Allen said, I was the guy that broke down your door that time with a knife in my hand. You know, you're a real stand-up guy for not pressing charges.
Here's some chicken.
Right. Here's some chicken. I met these people down at the beach. I cut up a chicken for them. Don't mind the blood on my knife, my foot-long knife that I had in my pocket. But he goes, so he tells Ralph Spinelli, he's like, hey, Ralph, I hear you're into some criminal activity, which Ralph has admitted that he was into criminal activity at this point, owning these nightclubs. And he's like, you know, I could maybe help you out because I'm capable of killing people. This is what Leigh says. And Leigh tells him, you know, what you really do if you want to, say, hire a contract killer is you find the person that you want killed, and then you kill a bunch of random people, and then you mix in the contract killing in with the random killing, so it just looks like a crazy person. And Ralph is going, well, you really thought this out, pal. But he's like, but Ralph is thinking he's already had some trouble with police. I'm sure he's thinking this guy could be wearing a fucking wire.
Yeah.
So he tells him, dude, you got to get out of here. And Arthur Leigh Allen says, I'll tell you what, I'm going to prove it. I'm going to kill somebody in San Francisco, and you're going to know it's me. And so Spinelli goes, dude, get lost. So Lee gets lost. October 11th, 1969, San Francisco. Washington and Cherry Street, a cab driver named Paul Stein pulls over to the side of the road. The man who was in the car with him, his fare, pulls out a gun and shoots Paul Stein in the back of the head as soon as he puts the car in park. The guy gets out, takes a piece of Paul Stein's shirt and cuts it off. And then he walks off toward a park there in San Francisco called the Presidio. Now, a couple of cops said they saw a large white man lumbering toward the Presidio right after the murder. But they didn't stop him. And do you want to know why? Because the first report that went out on the cops' wire was that they were looking for a black male.
Oh.
So they let this guy go, right?
Uh-huh.
Do we know that the guy walking away from the crime was the Zodiac? No. Because it was houses. This is San Francisco. This isn't rural like Lake Herman Road was. So it could have just been a guy walking to his house. Fact is, he was just a tall, kind of big, lumbering guy. But just in case, the cops took a description and made a composite sketch. All right. Now, this sketch was shown to a number of other people, and even the cop who saw the man lumbering away was asked, does Arthur Leigh Allen match the description of the man that you saw that night walking? And the cop said no. He was larger than, Arthur Leigh Allen was larger than the man I saw. The man I saw had a round face. Arthur Leigh Allen had a round face, but it wasn't that round. Okay. So the cop says that wasn't Arthur Leigh Allen. Again, we don't know if that was the Zodiac killer. Okay. Yeah. We're just kind of going on that. Now, 2 days after that killing, the San Francisco Chronicle and the cops get a letter in which the Zodiac shows a bomb diagram. And he says, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to blow up school children getting off their school buses. He says they make really good targets. When the school bus stops, they come bouncing off.
Of course, they'll come bouncing off in a different way.
That's right. And you just shoot them as they bouncing off, or you blow them up. And he shows a bomb, and the bomb diagram is a bomb that could actually work. Really complicated bomb diagram that he comes up with. It's made up in part with ammonium. Why can't I speak? Ammonium nitrate and fertilizer and gravel. That's important. Ammonium nitrate, fertilizer, and gravel is in the Zodiac's bomb diagram.
Is that part of his chicken recipe?
Oh, God.
I'm sorry, I'm going on about the chicken.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving along.
Oh, yeah. And Waldo pointed out a great detail that I missed on that. The cop, the cop who saw the guy lumbering down the street, he said that the guy had a widow's peak. Which is where, he said it was like hair in front and on this, sort of like my hair is slowly becoming. Well, Arthur Leigh Allen, as you saw from the picture, didn't have a widow's peak.
Okay.
Okay. Now, jumping back into this, after the Paul Stein case, Arthur Leigh Allen goes back to Ralph Spinelli and says, see, I told you. And Ralph Spinelli goes, okay, get the fuck out of here, pal. Like, now I don't want to talk to you even more. Right. So that's basically how Arthur Leigh Allen ties to each of the cases according to evidence. Okay. Some obviously are more convincing than others. Sherry Jo Bates, not really much of a tie, but we don't even know if the Zodiac killed Sherry Jo Bates. Okay. Seems to be the best tying evidence is Blue Rock Springs, where he may or may not have known Darlene from working at IHOP. and the Paul Stein thing, if you believe Ralph Spinelli. But the problem with all of these things is you have to go on the words of witnesses who may be seeking publicity. Ralph Spinelli was already a criminal at that time. Don Cheney seems to throw more details into the case every time a new book is written. So you do have to go on a lot of witness. Now, the Lake Berryessa, I think both you and I can agree that the Lake Berryessa probably has the most good evidence.
Yes.
The chicken.
The one that I keep clinging to.
Right. The fact that
who would use chickens as an alibi?
I don't know. And in that way, too, it's just so fucking random. I was like, I met this couple. I had a chicken. Hey, I had a chicken. But he says he's going to the place where they were murdered and decided not to go there. The aforementioned chicken. Yes. The foot-long knife with blood on it. I mean, that's just a lot of odd things.
And no leftovers.
And keep in mind now, the Arthur Leigh Allen, he offered this to the police.
What?
All this information. Okay. They didn't pry it out of him. He was like, oh yeah, Lake Berryessa. Well, let me tell you about that, right? Well, here's the thing. This story gets a little bit crazier, okay? On September 27th, 1974, that's exactly 5 years after the Lake Berryessa attack. To the day, 5 years, Allen gets arrested, and he's arrested for molesting yet another child. This time, he spends 2.5 years in prison.
Well, that's the IHOP lady. Why would he be obsessed with her? Obviously, he's not interested in legal women.
You know,
that's into children.
Very good point.
Like,
a lot of profilers on the Zodiac case say that the Zodiac was attracted to age-appropriate women.
Okay.
And Arthur Leigh Allen does seem to prefer children. So maybe that's a strike against Arthur Leigh Allen being the Zodiac.
Okay.
You know, now on the 2.5 years that Arthur Leigh Allen was in prison, no Zodiac letters were sent or received. Okay, he gets out of prison, you get another Zodiac letter, the first in almost 3 years. You know, now it gets even better because if you go all the way to July of 1992, keep in mind Arthur Leigh Allen is free. He's being investigated. The Ralph Spinelli thing, I think, was in the late 80s when he came forward and said, this guy came to me with this contract killer story and said, I'm the Zodiac. That aroused a little bit of interest, but it didn't really do much. What really aroused interest was in July of 92, Mike Michaud, who was with Darlene Ferrin, remember the couple that got shot to pieces in Blue Rock Springs? He was shown a photo lineup, which is where you just have random photos of criminals, and the cop puts it down and says, you don't have to pick anybody out just because I'm showing you this. But if you see the person who shot you here, point him out. Mike Michaud looks at it and says, that's him. That's the man who shot me. And he points to Arthur Leigh Allen. This was enough for the cops finally to get a search warrant and maybe an arrest warrant for Arthur Leigh Allen, which would have been the first time anyone ever had arrest warrants signed against them in the Zodiac case.
How many years later was this?
This was in 1992, and the last known Zodiac murder was in 1969.
Yeah,
So, and remember when I said he was impaired and he couldn't figure out if the car was a Cadillac or a Corvair or a compact or what? This is that guy. But he apparently, it was enough for the cops to go, oh, okay, we finally have someone who's identifying the Zodiac killer. So they get a search warrant. And this whole time, Arthur Leigh Allen, though his parents have died, is still living on Fresno Street in Vallejo. He pretty much just stuck around Vallejo. He never moved anywhere, you know, even in spite of all his trouble and losing all the jobs. And I'm sure people talked about him like, oh, God, there's that guy, you know, especially after spending 2.5 years in prison for molesting yet another child. They get a search warrant. But the problem is the detective in the case, is going to serve it and go through this Fresno house. Well, the day before, or 2 days before actually, he gets a call. and they say, you know that guy you were looking at? There's another cop. He goes, you know that guy you were looking into that you want to arrest for the Zodiac case, Arthur Leigh Allen? Well, I'm in his house. And the guy goes, why are you in his house? And he says, well, because he's laying dead on the floor. Because he had a massive heart attack and died on August 26, 1992. Arthur Leigh Allen was dead. They went ahead and served the search warrant, looked through the Fresno Street house. They found a royal typewriter with elite font. Remember what I said about the Sherry Jo Bates confession letter? They found the Zodiac watch, which I showed you. They found .22 caliber Super X ammunition, which was the same ammunition, well, the same kind of ammunition that was used on Lake Herman Road, the first official Zodiac case. They found a foot-long knife. They found pipe bombs and a diagram for a bomb that, amongst other components, had ammonium nitrate, fertilizer, and gravel.
Man, this man threw nothing away.
I tell you what.
He kept his memories.
I mean, what do you think about that? After all this time and all this investigation.
Why would you have that?
Why would you keep it?
It's like,
I mean, and also, they had
didn't find the chickens.
No, they didn't find the chickens.
Sorry,
no feathers. But
stupid. I'm sorry.
There was a guy who actually, one of the things the cop really wanted is he wanted a videotape that had the letter Z written on it. And they got the videotape in the search warrant, and no one's ever said what it had on it. But obviously, if it was like Arthur Leigh Allen confessing, we would have heard about it probably in 1992.
Maybe he just taped episodes of Full House. He was,
Maybe so. Maybe he was a fan of.
That's why I went. Well, no.
Maybe he was a fan of V and just got the letters wrong.
That's true. That's true.
But either way, that foot-long knife, that they found in his house.
Yes. Don't
you think the cops should have tested that against the wounds on Brian Hartnell?
Yes.
They didn't. That was never tested against anything. Okay. So we have a lot of evidence for and against. Okay, so let's go through the evidence we have for Arthur Leigh Allen. We have everything that was found in the search warrant that I just described. We got the Don Cheney story, which, again, if that's true, that he said that on New Year's Day of 1969, Arthur Leigh Allen would have to be the Zodiac killer. We have the size 10.5 boot. We have the location of the killings, him living in close proximity to several of them. There was a sister-in-law that Arthur Leigh Allen had who said that he liked to misspell words on purpose in Christmas cards and stuff. And the Zodiac liked to misspell words. One in particular that she pointed out was she said that Arthur Leigh Allen sent her a Christmas card in which he wrote Christmas as Chris Mass with 2 S's at the end. And Zodiac, in one of his letters, wrote Christmas as Chris Mass with 2 S's.
Christ Mass.
Christ Mass.
Which people have.
Right, which is a Catholic thing, right? Yes. Things against the Zodiac, or Arthur Leigh Allen being the Zodiac killer. The handwriting does not match, according to Sherwood Morrell, who was the handwriting examiner. Doesn't match. Would you like to see a side-by-side comparison? And I'd like to get your opinion.
Okay.
All right.
Of the
handwriting.
Okay.
Okay, so on the left is the Zodiac. On the right is Arthur Leigh Allen. What do you think?
There's a few that are a little, but.
You think they match or not?
Not exactly, but.
Is it close enough or?
Some are close, but.
So that's the handwriting comparison. Draw from it what you will. Again, we talked about that the DNA that was later tested did not match Arthur Leigh Allen's, nor did it match Don Cheney's. The fingerprint, there was a thumbprint, a bloody thumbprint that was left at the Paul Stein murder, the cab driver. It did not match Arthur Leigh Allen. Now, the Zodiac made phone calls to the police in which he taunted them. Nancy Stover was a woman who heard, she was a 911 dispatcher. They didn't record calls like they do now then. So she only has her memory to go on. But she heard Arthur Leigh Allen's voice and said that did not sound like the man she talked to. Brian Hartnell said that did not sound like the man that he talked to. And again, we talked about that Arthur Leigh Allen seemed to prefer children as opposed to age-appropriate women. So, what are you thinking, Rebecca? Having heard this entire story of Arthur Leigh Allen. Oh, also, let me point this out before you make your determination. Some people who knew Arthur Leigh Allen said that he was ambidextrous. And armchair detectives often say that with the handwriting, he could have maybe used the other hand. Now, Arthur Leigh Allen says he's left-handed. That was his thing. Other people said that he was ambidextrous. Who knows? There's no real evidence one way or another. But I wanted to point that out since Wes showed you the comparison of the handwriting. But what do you think? What are you thinking? If you were in a court of law and I just presented that as an attorney, would you say you could absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, convict him?
No.
And what would you base that on? Your doubts. I think I can guess what a lot of them would be.
The fact that he preferred children. Fingerprints don't match. You know.
Yeah, that's the kind of hard evidence.
Yeah.
Forensic
obviously,
evidence.
He's a cuckoo bird.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't think there's enough that you could say, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of how I feel about it. I know Robert Graysmith wrote a couple books, actually. He really likes Arthur Leigh Allen as a suspect. The thing about it is all this evidence is circumstantial.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to look at it like, okay, where there's smoke, there's fire. But there are other people who have a lot of circumstantial evidence against them as well. And sadly, circumstantial evidence does not hold up in court.
No.
You have to have something like DNA. You have to have a fingerprint. You have to have somebody seeing them on the scene, some kind of tangible forensic evidence that you can use against someone. And sadly, well, I don't want to say sadly, because the guy might be innocent. If he's innocent, he's innocent. But you have to have that, and there was not that in this case.
Yeah.
Now, he probably would have been arrested based on Mike Michaud's pointing him out in a photo lineup had he not died. But I don't know if that would have convicted him. Because Mike Michaud's memory is, impaired.
Yeah.
But again, he was shot full of holes. I mean, you can't really blame the guy. He went through a horribly traumatic event and was very young when it happened, too. So, yeah, I mean, my personal opinion, I don't know. I can't say for sure. I know I've read a lot in preparing for this show. I read a lot of different theories about it. I read some theories that even go to like dates. There was one I read that had the most bizarre thing. It said like Arthur Leigh Allen's father died on March 17th, 1971. That was Darlene Ferrin's birthday. And it's like, okay, well, like, what did the father say? He's like, hey, honey, you remember when our son murdered that woman in town? I'm going to die on her birthday, okay? I mean, that really doesn't.
No.
It's just a coincidence of timing.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of go.
And there were no more killings or anything that could kind of match up or.
After the last official Zodiac? Well, there's a lot of theories about that, too. Really, there's no hard evidence to say that the Zodiac ever killed anyone after Paul Stine.
Okay.
On our last show, we discussed a case of a woman who went missing in South Lake Tahoe called, her name was Donna Lass. And it had a postcard that was sent to the Chronicle, to Paul Avery at the Chronicle. I'm going to get his name right this time, not Paul Stine. And it said it was the Zodiac taking credit for that. Some people say it was a forgery.
Okay.
A lot of those Zodiac letters, we don't know if it was actually the Zodiac that wrote them. We know a few of them were definitely from the Zodiac. One in particular, because it had. Remember when I said Paul Stine had his shirt cut off? He sent it in a letter, a bloody piece of Paul Stine shirt. So we know the Zodiac sent that one, and there are several others where it's clearly the handwriting, and he's taking credit for stuff. Zodiac loved to take credit for stuff too. He sometimes took credit for shit that was like, you know. And I think by the end of it, he used to put in the later letters sort of like a scoreboard. And I think he got up into the 30s of victims, because he would like put San Francisco PD 0, me 30. And it's like, there's no way he could have killed that many people, but he likes to take credit for it. I mean, I guess he could have, but I don't think he did, because there were a lot of things. When shit would pop up in the newspaper, he obviously read the newspaper and he would start taking credit for it. So he kind of liked to keep himself in the limelight. For some reason, though, he stopped writing, and the communications started to change, and he stopped even calling himself the Zodiac. I think the last letter that we know he wrote was signed a citizen, not even Zodiac. So some folks think that his opinion of himself changed, that he just sort of vanished off into becoming another person, and to just becoming a regular person. Other people go, if this guy was that egotistical then and narcissistic, he will never not be egotistical and narcissistic. Some folks think he died right after. Some folks think he was imprisoned right after. If it was Arthur Leigh Allen, with the exception of that 2.5-year period, he was free the whole time. So, you know, so I don't know. I don't know. Very interesting case, very interesting story, very interesting suspect. As I think both you and I agree, we can't really convict him based on the evidence that we have in front of us. But we're getting about to the end of this hour. And
story time.
End of story time. All the blood and murder and chickens. This is not going to be the last segment of the Zodiac series, but it's going to be the last segment for a minute, because next week I have a very good interview. I think you guys are going to like, a returning guest to the show, but I'm not going to say who it is yet. Okay.
You whisper it in my ear. Right?
I will. I'm going to tell you. Yeah. You guys will have to wait for just a minute. The suspense will be good. You'll like it. But anyway, Beck, I really appreciate you coming and guest hosting the show. I think it adds a new perspective, a fresh perspective, and you not being familiar with the case, it's like getting a very objective opinion. So thanks again for coming. And I want to thank all you guys for participating and watching. And I hope that you like this video and subscribe to the channel. There'll be more good Zodiac material coming, and a lot of other stuff I have planned. So anyway, until I see you next week, I want you to take care of yourselves, and you know, have a good new year. Do you have a good new year?
It was okay, I guess.
Yeah, mine was kind of boring, but whatever. Hope you guys had a more exciting new year. But anyway, I'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves.